The result of premature biological aging in our body happens on such a global level.
People all of a sudden, they look fine, and then you see them a couple years later and they're like, damn, they age fast.
The question we have to ask ourselves is, what is it that damages our DNA?
If 30, 40, 50, 80% of your energy is being sucked away by something else, how do you have the energy to regenerate your cells, to think your brilliant thoughts, and to be your most energetic self?
When we can address dysfunction before it becomes disease, that is really how we reverse the aging process.
They've been tested already. Their doctor said nothing's wrong with them.
So my blood panel for a 40-year-old coming to my clinic, or a 50-year-old or a 60-year-old, but I like starting early.
Doing that second tier, so looking at more specific, is there actually oxidative stress in the body? Is there damage to our lipids? Is there damage to our DNA?
I work with a lot of high-performing individuals, and as we work with them, we want to be able to quantify results. So how do I know that what we're doing is actually working? Well, we can do that through age testing.
Welcome back everyone, my name is Stefan and I'm your host for the Ageless Docuseries. It's been just one episode so far and you already learned so much about aging. But how would you describe aging to somebody else? Our guests' answers to this question were very interesting. Despite the experts' different backgrounds and specialties, they all agreed on one thing. There is one specific catalyst to aging that causes bone loss, cardiovascular disease, cognitive decline, low energy, cancer, and so much more. More interestingly, it's also what protects us and keeps us alive. Let's start this episode with everything you need to know about inflammation.
The result of premature biological aging in our body happens on such a global level. Our cells start to shrivel, our telomeres shorten, our mitochondria slow down, our extracellular matrix gets congested, our lymphatic system congeals, it doesn't move, our brain gets inflamed, we can't think, we start to have dementia and memory loss. We have osteoporosis, our bones break down, our cells start to turn into degeneration, we start to march towards cancer. So from a viewpoint of homotoxicology, which is again from European bioregulatory medicine, if we are not releasing, then we are marching towards aging. So for example, if you get ill and you are spiking a fever, or you are having diarrhea, or you are throwing up, the initial thing that most people in the States do is take a Tylenol. They take something to stop the diarrhea. They shut down the body's own innate response to inflammation, to illness. And when we do that one too many times, the body forgets how to get rid of things. It forgets how to have an inflammation response. So fever is a good thing. When I see patients who are diagnosed and dealing with cancer, one of the most common things I hear is, Dr. Stills, I don't understand why I have cancer. I've never been sick. I haven't been sick in the last 15 years. How did I end up with cancer? And I'm like, exactly for this reason, because you didn't allow your body to be sick. So it might sound weird, a natural doctor saying it's important to get sick. I'm not saying you want to have a flu every month or feel crappy every month, but having a good flu and allowing your body to express, to heat up, to release is such a gift you can give yourself. If you don't do that, then what happens is the toxins start to go into the body deeper. And at some point, they're in the extracellular matrix, they're clogging up the lymphatic system, they're throwing off the pH, they're demineralizing you, And at some point, they cross over from outside the cell to inside the cell. Now they're starting to affect the mitochondria, they're starting to affect the cell wall, they're shutting down the DNA, the RNA, all the important protein synthesis, all the important processes that are happening are being affected. And what we end up having is aging, and eventually we have a cancerous or a chronic disease situation.
Metaflammation is a topic, it's been around now, I mean, the term, probably about 12, 15 years. And so when you think about your body's metabolism, all the metabolic reactions going on in your body, not just, whether your metabolism is fast or slow, am I skinny, am I overweight, but all the metabolic reactions that are going on in your body that are either driving you towards future health or creating a process called inflammatory aging or Inflamm-AGING. So when you have metaflammation, basically either it's a vector, virus, bug of some kind. Maybe you get exposed to something environmental. Maybe it's an intrinsic cell defect or excessive stress or an injury. Something turns on the inflammation process. And that's a good thing, because what the inflammation process is supposed to do is take care of that insult that occurred. But what happens, we don't have adequate nutrients, maybe we're on different drug therapies, it could be stress, it can be excess exercise, it can be not enough exercise. Any number of things can keep us in that inflammatory state so that we don't go back to homeostasis, meaning our body doesn't turn off the inflammation response, instead it holds on to it. And there's several things that start to occur when that happens. One, you start to make a lot of bad actor lipids. So now I'm making more oxidized cholesterol, I'm making more lipoproteins that are more making you at risk for cardiometabolic disease. I start to store iron, but I start to lose my ability to store ferritin. So I keep my iron, but I can't store my ferritin. Now, why is that such a big deal? You need ferritin to make erythropoietin, which helps your bone marrow to make red blood cells and platelets. And then after that, when that metabolic inflammation is taking place, it turns your insulin receptors off, basically. So your insulin receptors become less active. And when they're less active, that means that you're going to need more insulin to push glucose into your cell. And that's where we start to really see the compounding inflammatory process, because insulin is incredibly inflammatory. The next piece that happens is you lose bone. So as you have more inflammatory compounds like cytokines called interleukin-6, TNF-alpha, you start to signal basically a process where you're losing bone and not rebuilding bone. And then the last two things that really, I think, accelerate this process of aging is you lose neuroplasticity. So basically what happens, you get neuroinflammation. Neuroinflammation starts to kind of wear away at the capacity for you for learning and memory, right? Because you're destroying neurons, literally. The last piece is at the cellular level, you start to lose mitochondrial function. And why that's important is mitochondria are the energy and powerhouses that drive every function in every cell in your body. And so when we start to lose mitochondrial capacity, we start to see more and more inefficiency in cells. That leads to more inflammatory signaling, which eventually, as we age, we start to create more of what we know as senescent cells, cells that just hang around and secrete inflammatory compounds. Basically, your body has to function to get through each day. And it's a system of measures and countermeasures. And if I can't keep that in balance, I start to make more byproducts of metabolism that trigger inflammatory signaling. And why is that important? Because inflammation signaling will start to alter how, for example, you can catch a hormone at the receptor site. Inflammation chemistry will lead to damaging tissues. So, for example, your kidneys are very, very sensitive to oxidative stress. So that's why you hear the term metabolic inflammation, or leading to Inflamm-AGING or inflammatory aging.
A lot of people ask me, what does aging mean to you? Aging really is fundamentally two things. Inflammation, and that inflammation, some people call it inflamm-aging, is at a cellular and at an organ system level. And then when that happens, our cells can't exactly do what they need to do. And then organs, heart, lung, brain, blood vessels, start to have physiological stress. And then when that happens, our systems tend to break down. The other thing that happens with aging is that from a biomechanical level, we start to have structural problems in terms of our ligaments, tendons, and fascia. Often we get pain and dysfunctional movement. When you put that together, it's just harder to live and harder to be functional and harder to feel good. And so then what we try to do is come up with strategies to fix that.
What I find very interesting is that people don't understand the importance of stress and microinflammation. You know, that's what destroys the innards and destroys your blood vessels and the way your body functions, and all your catecholamines and your stress hormones are shooting up. It's like putting acid inside your body. And I think even though if you have a healthy diet, good training program, you're doing everything right, but you're under tremendous stress, hard work won't kill you. Stress can kill you. Microinflammation to me is really dangerous because when you get microinflammation, it causes plaques, as an example, in the arteries because you're traumatizing them. So in order to protect themselves, they form plaques, and that's how you clog up your arteries. But also on your mental status, you're not sleeping right. Your sleeping patterns are getting all messed up. You're holding things in, and now this is causing a whole array of other physiologic parameters. Remember, your body is like an iron bridge. It rusts. The antioxidants, that's why we take vitamins or free radical scavengers to grab onto that free electron to squelch that biochemical fire that's in all of our bodies. Stress causes that biochemical fire to be even worse.
Aging, by my definition, is death by 1,000 cuts. They're tiny little cuts. You don't see them necessarily. You got a little bruise, a little ache, or a little pain. So if you have tendonitis of your shoulder, that's aging. And the most fundamental aspect of aging is inflammation. You don't age without inflammation. So if you could decrease inflammation in the body in general, then you will decrease the aging process because you're repairing better and faster. Now, every time you have a cut, you have a scar. You could have a big, bad-looking scar, or you could have a small, clean-looking scar, but a scar is still a scar. And every scar you have, every area of inflammation that you have that causes a scar, or fibrosis as we call it, then that's another brick in the house of aging. You can see aging on people's faces. You can look at 65-year-olds and they look like they're 85, right? You can look at 50-year-olds and they look like they're 85. So what's happening with their aging? What's causing their aging? It's damage. It's inflammation. It's wear and tear. It's alcoholism, having too much exposure to sun. So athletes, they think that that's going to prevent them from aging. High-performance athletics causes you to age much faster. So aging is a process of wearing down and not repairing adequately. So you have to be able to stop the wearing down, and ideally you prevent it. Ideally you don't break down. You can't hide in a cave and not age because your body still has to recycle itself and repair itself. Every cell has its own cycle. Every cell has to be replaced periodically. And we have only so many cycles of repair and regeneration. We talk about telomeres and how they relate to aging. And as our telomeres get shorter, so the telomeres happen because what you're doing is the cell has to replace itself, and then you got two little snippets at the end of the gene that have to replace what you lost when the cell died. So what we want to do is you want to lengthen your telomeres, and you decrease that aging process by doing that. But magnetic fields do that because they help you with the repair, they decrease the inflammation. So all the things that help you with repair and recovery will decrease aging.
Inflammation is a really important factor for the brain, the heart, the kidneys, everything, right? You know, systemic inflammation, because it's usually not in one place, it's something systemic. It triggers all kinds of things, especially the immune system. And when we have inflammation in the brain, inflammation is caused by a variety of things, you know, toxins, infections, you know, bad high lipid levels. And so when you have inflammation in the brain, the microglia get activated to try to deal with that. And they kind of get in a killing mode. And say you have an infection in your brain, say you have a virus in your brain, then the microglia get called up to try to kill things, and they create inflammation as a way to kill things. They cause inflammatory cytokines to be released. It's especially important for people that have a genetic risk for Alzheimer's, so the ApoE4 gene is associated with a higher risk for Alzheimer's. And what happens when people have that ApoE4 gene is they will have more amyloid deposits in their brain. So we know that amyloid we think it's a protective response. When you have some inflammation in your brain, be it from infections, toxins, etc., the brain will secrete the amyloid to try to cool down that inflammation. So if it was just going on in a short term, you had a respiratory infection and you had a little, inflammation to help fight your infection, okay, that's a good thing. But if you have chronic infections, chronic toxins, and you eat chronically, bad food that's causing inflammation, then when inflammation is going on over long periods of time, you're going to just keep that amyloid response turned on, and it's going to secrete more and more and more, and then gum up the brain and kill the brain cells. So the answer isn't to remove the amyloid, it's to remove what is triggering that, what is triggering the inflammation.
A major area of research it's called immunosenescence or senescence. And cells, what they're finding is, especially the immune cells, and the immune cells actually dictate everything else. And there's all these theories of aging and mitochondrial dysfunction, basically oxidation, hormone dysfunction. But what causes it? It's your immune system. Let's say you get an infection. If your body does not clear it very quickly and you get chronic stimulation of these immune cells, they shut down. And then what happens is the Th1 goes down, so now you can't fight intracellular infections, but now your body, basically, the Th2 is trying to fight these infections, pumping out all this, basically, inflammation. And these senescent cells, they don't die, so they would normally, the Th1 cells, like natural killer cells, would go, they have signals and go destroy those cells and get rid of them, which is, it's healthy and good. But now they stick around, they're not doing what they're supposed to, and they're making tons of oxidative substances, reactive oxygen species, and they recruit more senescent cells. So it becomes a vicious cycle. If you've noticed, like people all of a sudden, they look fine, and then you see them a couple years later, and they're like, damn, they age fast. And especially if they've had something where a chronic stimulus, an infection they didn't get over, mold toxins, or heavy metals, EMFs, and if it's constant, the T cells shut down. Now, if they go into immunosenescence, what you want to do is kill those cells. And they found, for instance, diabetics. If you give specific senolytics, they're called, which specifically kill the senescent cells, it basically reverses diabetes, reverses heart disease. It's amazing. And there's another concept which we're seeing a lot and a lot more research going into, like COVID patients get this. So if, let's say someone gets COVID, they don't get rid of it, the T cells do the same thing, but it's called T cell exhaustion. Those are reversible, but basically the same thing. They shut down and your natural killer cell function is low. And now, a number of the studies show like long COVID, they actually get reactivation of Epstein-Barr, toxoplasmosis, and so you got to bring that immune system back, and that's what we do. We use immune modulators in those patients, and they get better very quickly. So, people are realizing refocusing on the immune system.
How true is the 1,000 little cuts analogy by Dr. Willem Pollack? We often neglect the little issues and let them pile up until it's way too late. Just like scars, these things don't happen for no reason. You're about to hear some eye-opening facts about the products you consume every day and how they harm your body. At the end of this section, you'll also learn from Dr. Apostolov about how trauma can be a trigger of inflammation.
Inflammation at its core has too much of something that the body doesn't like. So too much food for me, too much gluten was toxic and I got celiac. Most people don't get there, but for others, too much sugar alters the way the body reacts and it leads to diabetes. Too much toxins stress the mitochondria. That leads to aging. All of these, I think we want to circle back to, it's not just about having more years. It's about having more healthy years where we're vital and we can do what we want, not just be confined to a chair watching the world go by.
I used to go and teach doctors how to use this food sensitivity test in their office. And we were doing it because people were walking in with, brain fog and headaches and joint pain and autoimmune issues. And we'd have them take this test. And then 3 weeks later, they'd come back and they'd look at the results. And we put them on this diet. And what I started to realize was that the same foods kept showing up. And so, we had a 3-week time period between them getting the test sent out and getting the results. And I thought, well, this is dumb. They want something to do during this time. And since the same foods keep showing up, why not just pull the most common foods out and see what happens? What I discovered in doing this testing and then taking now tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people through this, is that these foods were creating an inflammatory response that was making people hold on to weight and crave the very foods that were hurting them. And here they are. Gluten was one, and gluten especially, and there's two reasons, especially in the United States. In the United States, if you're eating gluten, you're getting glyphosate, even if it's organic, because of the fact that the wind blows and seed blows and everything else. And glyphosate creates its own problems with your microbiome and the shifts there. So gluten's definitely one. It also makes your gut leakier. And if you get your gut leakier or gut more permeable, then you'll have all sorts of food reactions to the most likely other candidates, which are dairy, eggs, soy, corn, peanuts, and then also sugar and artificial sweeteners have their own inflammatory response. I mean, sugar, super problematic. It was interesting when I wrote the Sugar Impact Diet, I was looking for any positive thing about sugar. I mean, maybe if you're a marathon runner, using some straight glucose could be helpful, but beyond that, it's like you can't find it. And we can live without it, so that should make you think, do we really need this? I remember my mom was like, but we need sugar. I know you might want sugar, Mom, but you don't actually need it. So sugar's going to create an inflammatory response. It's going to keep insulin up, which then creates inflammation. And artificial sweeteners actually disrupt your gut microbiome as well. And a lot of that gut dysbiosis creates its own inflammatory response as well as you can't absorb your nutrients. So those are what I found to be the most common ones. Now, that might not be for everybody. Maybe someone's fine with corn or peanuts. But when you pull those foods out, first of all, it's hard to eat processed foods when you pulled those out because you got rid of all of them, right? And it forces you to start to focus on eating more real food. Clean protein sources, lots of non-starchy vegetables, a little bit of slow, low carbs, but things that are not grain sourced, and some fruit. That's it. Simple.
Here's where we have to start talking about consumption of oils that are new to the human race. So before World War II, we had never eaten hydrogenated oils before. Margarine was one of those miracle products of the industrial war machine that came after World War II. The technology of hydrogenation of oils actually was part of the process to build tires. And tires actually were one of the most strategic advances in World War II. Largely the Allied forces, because of the vulcanization process, we got ahead of the Germans largely because of tires. And that type of chemistry, well, we have the chemistry, let's continue to put it in the food stream and make people healthier by giving them margarine. Well, here's the thing that has happened since World War II. Corn oil, canola oil, soy oil, these, I call them industrial seed oils because I don't think they're fit for human consumption. These were potentially part of our diet before World War II, but not as purified extracted oils. Largely before the turn of the century, 1900, most of the fat consumption in the human race was through olive oil from the beginning of time. Plant-derived oils are super rich in omega-6s, and the omega-6 pathway feeds directly into arachidonic acid. Arachidonic acid is converted through a number of different enzymatic processes in our bodies into compounds that are known as eicosanoids. And eicosanoids are these fatty acid hormone modulators that control pain, inflammation, blood clotting. And so when you think about the drivers of pain, inflammation, and blood clotting, omega-6s are the primary driver that gives us the need for the class of drugs known as non-steroidal anti-inflammatories. I actually used to work for Merck Pharmaceutical, and I represented Vioxx. Vioxx was a $3.4 billion pain-relieving drug that is a non-steroidal anti-inflammatory. It blocks the conversion of arachidonic acid into the prostaglandins that mediate pain, inflammation, and fever. When we think about environmental influences, omega-6 fatty acid excess in our diet and omega-3 fatty acid deficiency in our diet are the primary drivers of why we see so much pain, inflammation, and fever. And the pain and inflammation are some of the primary drivers behind every chronic disease that we know to mankind today.
So one of the things that we know is that chronic inflammation and DNA damage lead to premature aging and chronic diseases like cancer. So the question we have to ask ourselves is, what is it that damages our DNA? Well, we know that many of the chemicals, the toxic chemicals that we have designed today, are damaging to the DNA of the human body. And when the DNA gets damaged, it basically destroys the healthy part of the cell. And the cell starts to chronically ferment, and then it replicates as a dysfunctional cell. The mitochondria becomes damaged, dysfunctional, and if that continues, you basically get a cancer cell, and that's why we see cancer rates skyrocketing. But you also see neurodegenerative disease skyrocketing, autoimmune disease skyrocketing, heart disease. A lot of these things are so related because of the underlying chronic inflammation that happens, which are all associated with premature aging. Well, the toxins, what they're doing is they're damaging the DNA. Toxins like heavy metals that are found now in your water, your tap water, that are found in the food, the endocrine disruptors that are in your shampoos and your lotions and your skincare, your toothpaste even. A lot of these chemicals that are allowed in your perspirants and even the chemicals that are on the carpet and the formaldehyde that's in the cupboards in your house, they off-gas, VOCs, volatile organic compounds. All of these toxic chemicals that we're surrounded with every single day are literally damaging our DNA every second.
There's actually a really clear connection between trauma and stored trauma in the body and aging. Many people don't know this. One of the biology effects of trauma is this accumulation of oxidative stress inside of the cells. Oxidative stress accumulates in the mitochondria because of a trauma response, also because of stress response, but then that trauma response shuts everything down, and so now you're not clearing it out. Now your superoxides are not able to come in and clear out this oxidative stress. And that oxidative stress binds to your DNA and causes not only epigenetic changes, but then also for your mitochondria and your cells to age faster. And so oxidative stress is actually one of the major targets that I look at for addressing stored trauma in the body. And it's been incredible to see the changes in people's health and their renewed energy as we just focus in on the biology aspect of oxidative stress and that connection with aging process.
As you've just heard, it's not only about the food we consume. Cosmetics, furniture, and even your past traumas can all be the driving force of inflammation and leave their mark on a cellular level. But then the question becomes, how can you test how well you're doing and if you're being affected by these causes? Over the years, our experts have tried dozens of tests to assess the condition of their patients. And right now, they're about to share the most effective tests with you. According to one of our guests, once you're empowered with this knowledge, you can begin to stop the aging process and in some cases even reverse it. Stay with us for the full overview of each test, as so much eye-opening information has never been gathered in one place for you to access.
A lot of people complain to me when they first come in that they've been tested already. Their doctor said nothing's wrong with them. Well, they're running a standard CBC chem panel, maybe some differentials. So this is common blood work. Doctors are supposed to do that because they're looking for disease. They're doing a great job making sure you're not dying. And what's really going on is that they're not. And their tests aren't showing anything that, because if they're in range, you're normal. Well, is it better to be high in the range or low in the range? Well, it could be different for different people. And no one's really tracking the changes over time. It's just time, it looks okay, it looks okay, it looks okay. You actually, maybe you're supposed to be low in the range, but it's starting to creep up higher and higher, and you're still in the range, higher, higher, higher. No one will say anything until it's over the limit. Well, now all of a sudden you have a problem. And that's not true. Part of that is because we change doctors a lot. People are just depending on their physician to run the right tests, and you look fine. So what I've noticed is that people come in, they've been to a lot of practitioners, they've been told everything's normal, and yet they know something's not right. I don't feel like I used to. Again, the common symptoms, tired, fatigued, and all these things. And usually they're self-medicating. First sign, drinking too much coffee, then at night they're drinking too much alcohol or whatever. It's never good and has to have a great reason to be doing it. And so we start with the basics. Again, the hormone, immune, digestion, detoxification. There is something wrong. We're not running standard CBC chem panels. So we run our saliva, urine, blood, stool testing, identify the healing opportunities, and apply the general principles of healing to every cell, tissue, organ, and system in the body, the entire organism. And as everything improves, every cell, you don't have to teach a cell what its job is, do you? So it knows what to do. So as all the cells and tissues and organs start to improve function, like a rising tide lifts all the ships, we find that diagnoses are dropping off. They just fall away, don't exist anymore. And the person starts to return to very abundant health, great energy, great mood, total satiation, no cravings. They lose weight. They get a luster about them again that they haven't seen in many years. Everyone wants to know about their sex hormones and they're worried about being sexy and all this stuff. And that's great. And a lot of symptoms are from those sex hormones being out of balance, whether it's the progesterone to estrogen in women or in men. You have that, but more testosterone. So of course, we measure these things. But we also measure cortisol and DHEA. These represent the catabolic hormone cortisol and the anabolic hormone DHEA. They have to be in balance. So your body's constantly breaking down cortisol, catabolism or catabolic, and it wants to also build up. The counter-regulatory hormone for cortisol is DHEA. That's kind of the parent of your sex hormones anyway. And so these have to be in balance. That's a great place to start. It's done with a simple at-home saliva test. And by the way, since you're testing, we're going to get a morning, noon, afternoon, nighttime. We're going to look at the circadian rhythm, how out of balance that is. We're going to look at the total cortisol production, whether you're kind of burnt out, what phase of burnout are you in, more or less, and the sex hormones, of course. And on the same saliva test, we'd also get a peek into the immune system. We'll do what's called secretory IgA. It's a gut element that you need to know about. Could be low, chronic illness. Could be very high, acute illness. And then melatonin is another hormone we measure. So from one saliva test, we're getting a lot of healing opportunities, a lot of bang for our buck just there. And we do that and we see that the body is breaking down. We'll also do a urine test for dysbiosis in the gut and liver congestion and oxidative stress. We're rusting, we're aging. And so all these things are easily tested. You can test them at home, not too expensive. Of course, you need help understanding the results. But again, this explains, people are so relieved. They're so relieved that, my God, I was told nothing's wrong with me. And all of a sudden it's showing me my own body. It's speaking to us. These labs speak to us if we look. So if you're that far along, hormone, immune, digestion, we're looking at the liver, as I mentioned, a little bit deeper. You can look for food sensitivities, which is critical. Everyone has some. So let's test. Why guess? Elimination diets are oxidative stress. Now you can start going a little kind of a pain in the neck. So let's just test and see what you're sensitive to. And of course, then there's the microbiome, pathology. So we'll do a stool test for all of that too. So you really get this HIDDEN comprehensive look. What are the healing opportunities? And that's how we can customize the DRESS program.
There are a lot of tests you can do to see how well you're aging and also your hormonal health. So for aging, I like to look at a standard blood test that you might get at your doctor's office, but from a functional perspective. Now, when you go to the doctor and you get a blood test run, there's going to be ranges that they look at, and your doctor might look and see which ones turn up red, and those are the ones that he will focus on. But in naturopathic medicine and functional medicine, those ranges are much smaller. So we're not looking just for you to stay alive or to make it to the next appointment, but we're looking for you to really thrive. So we're looking at optimal ranges. And so we might see that your blood sugar is starting to creep up a little bit, and that's an indication that there's some inflammation going on that we need to address. We might see that your liver markers are starting to creep up, but they're not yet in the danger zone. But this just shows us that there's some dysfunction that needs to be addressed. And when we can address dysfunction before it becomes disease, that is really how we reverse the aging process. We don't wait for the fire to take over the whole house. We see that there's something kind of smoldering on the stove and we put it out right away, and that helps people to not have that collateral damage. A standard blood test, but we also like to look at organic acids. Organic acids are wonderful because it looks at that they tend to get from actual disease processes. So we really like to look at so many different things. We're looking at your gut microbiome in the organic acid test. We're looking at how well your body breaks down and metabolizes food. We're looking at oxidative stress, so any toxins or any biochemical processes in your body that are creating stress and creating damage to the DNA. We can see that before the actual symptoms starts to come out. So DNA damage is it just means that there's something going off in the cell that is causing it to behave a little differently than it's supposed to. And when we can catch it at the cellular level, we can catch it before disease processes begin. And that is really essential to helping us to reverse aging and prevent aging, accelerated aging from happening. And of course, our hormones, I recommend that everyone test their hormones starting at age 30 so they can catch their hormones before they start declining and really keep those hormones at optimal levels so that they don't have to go through the horrible emotional roller coaster of losing their health, losing their skin and hair and nail integrity, having heart disease, osteoporosis, cognitive decline. They can catch it before it happens. So we're all about preventative health when possible.
So I have 2 tiers of testing to determine how fast someone's aging. So you always have to do the foundational testing, and it's a much more extensive blood panel than just a metabolic panel, a blood count, a full thyroid panel, looking at antibodies, looking at markers of inflammation. I look at methylation, so measuring homocysteine, looking at all the nutrients in the bodies, sometimes going on to measure even more specific testing for the microbiome, so whether it's a stool test or looking at food sensitivity testing. And there's merits to testing and just deducing which are triggers. And then doing that second tier, so looking at more specific, is there actually oxidative stress in the body? Is there damage to our lipids? Is there damage to our DNA? You can measure that 8-hydroxydeoxyguanosine is a measure for DNA damage, and so on and so forth. But if you really wanted to look at measuring biologic age versus chronologic age, probably one of the best measures is combining a few things, and one of the strongest is looking at DNA methylation. So there's a panel that I do. And in the past, we would have maybe looked to telomere lengths, but we're finding that that isn't really accurate or as comprehensive as when you combine multiple markers. So it is a component of what we're looking for. So the first tier would be basic lab work that, in my eyes, as a functional medicine doctor, is much more extensive than any doctor would run. Then doing your second tier of testing and to actually testing that biologic age through DNA methylation, including telomeres and so on and so forth.
When we look at testing, men should definitely be looking at a couple key markers. Number one, they should be checking their hormone levels, not just total testosterone, but free testosterone. Free testosterone is the bioavailable or active form of testosterone, so we always want to check free testosterone. We want to look at thyroid hormone, specifically free T3, free T4. Those are the active, again, bioavailable forms of thyroid. We want to look at IGF-1, which is a marker, a surrogate for growth hormone production, which we know declines as men age. We want to look at a fasting insulin level. Now, insulin is related to blood sugar regulation. A fasting blood sugar level is helpful. Insulin level gives us a little more information of how we're processing blood sugar. Hemoglobin A1C is a 3-month window into our blood sugar regulation as well. So hemoglobin A1C is wonderful. Markers like homocysteine is a marker that looks for inflammation, for B vitamin deficiency, folate deficiency. It's important to look at homocysteine. It's important to look at markers of inflammation like CRP. Looking at complex lipid markers is incredibly important. You know, we hear about cholesterol, LDL, HDL as the typical lipid test that we do. What's really important are markers like ApoB, apolipoprotein B, which is the marker for every non-HDL cholesterol particle, is what's really important. LDL particle count. These are key markers, key metrics to help us understand men's health, understand their risk for disease, their risk for having a major adverse cardiac event, which is obviously one of the biggest single risks or causes of mortality. And so looking at all those cardiovascular markers are definitely big as well. Coronary calcium score is really also helpful for assessing cardiovascular risk. So these are all key tests that every man should be getting on a regular basis. Of course, you know, PSA for prostate cancer screening, regular colonoscopies, of course, those sorts of things are definitely important as well. Another test that everyone should be getting for longevity is genetic testing. Genetic testing helps us understand exactly what's right for you to optimize your health and promote longevity. It helps us understand what kind of food should you be eating, what kind of food should you not be eating. For example, ApoE is a gene related to how we process saturated fats. Saturated fats can potentially increase our risk of cardiovascular disease and Alzheimer's disease at an early age, cognitive decline at an early age. However, for certain variants of this ApoE gene, if we knew that variant, we might want to limit saturated fat intake because that completely reduces that risk. So things like red meat, eggs, milk, dairy, cheese, for example, for people with a certain variant, they may not want to be eating a lot of those foods specifically because we know that that will reduce their risk of major disease. We could look at genetics related to our body's ability to clear toxins. Which exercise is best for us? What hormones might be a problem for us? How do we improve our body's ability to function and metabolize? And so genetics are really a key part of longevity that everyone should be looking at. You know, I work with a lot of high-performing individuals, and as we work with them, we want to be able to quantify results. So how do I know that what we're doing is actually working? Well, we can do that through age testing. There's actually a way that we can measure your age. Now, you can measure your chronological age by looking at a calendar, but you can measure your biologic age with a simple blood test. This simple blood test is called methylation testing, or epigenetic age testing, allows us to measure the methyl group marks on your DNA that tells us your age. Think of it like rings of a tree, where we can very directly measure your biologic age. We can also measure your current rate of aging. Now, this is really important to know if what you're doing right now is working or not. Yeah, so I've had a number of clients where we will measure their age in the beginning. I can think of one of my clients, when she first joined us, she was 40 years old and her epigenetic age was 44. When we finished with her, she was 41 and a half and her epigenetic age was 38. So she got 6 years younger in that year and a half working with us. And so that's objective, quantifiable, demonstrable proof that what we're doing is working to actually reverse aging. We're not just slowing aging, we're actually reversing it. And that's where we are. And we're on the cutting edge of being able to start making really dramatic advances in that life extension. Stress kills. We know that stress promotes aging and that stress affects hormone production, it affects metabolism, it affects energy, it affects everything in our body. Well, how do we actually measure stress? We can measure it directly with a metric called heart rate variability, HRV. Now, what is heart rate variability? This is simply the variation in your heartbeat from one beat to the next. So when you measure your pulse or your heart rate, it may say 80. It's not actually 80. Every beat's actually varied to where one beat may be 79.98, 80.01, 80.03. that microsecond variation between each beat is actually critically important, because that is the balance between your parasympathetic rest and digest nervous system and your sympathetic fight or flight nervous system. And it's this yin and yang balance between the two that's showing up directly in that variation in your heart rate. And so we can measure that. It's called heart rate variability, which is the variation in your heartbeat from one beat to the next. It's not your heart rate, it's the variation in your heart rate from one beat to the next. And so a high heart rate variability signifies low stress. It signifies a very dynamic, adaptable, flexible system, which means that you are not stressed. A low heart rate variability signifies stress. It implies your system is, you're sick, you're not healthy, you're not optimized. That could be from poor nutrition, poor sleep, psychological stress, overtraining. Any of those things, for example, among others, can cause stress to our body that we can measure directly with heart rate variability. So all the high-performing individuals who tell me I'm not stressed, I could actually measure it and show you how you are stressed. But most importantly, we can now use that as a tool to train and improve our heart rate variability. We can measure it every day with wearable devices, and we can train that by focusing on the variables that are affecting it, using tools such as heart math, which is a way to train heart rate variability, through breathing exercises, through meditation, through identifying how can we improve our sleep and our nutrition. These are all key ways of affecting stress, which is promoting mortality and disease. And so tracking heart rate variability is a great surrogate for stress.
Preventive cardiologist is doing more labs. I certainly want to know all the vitamin panels, of course. I want to know all the inflammation markers, high sensitivity C-reactive protein, one called LPPLA2 inflammation test, myeloperoxidase inflammation test. I want to know about oxidative stress. That's a fancy word, but that's a way of assessing if your metabolism and your diet and your environment are working for you. That's a urine test called isoprostanes. I want to know sometimes heavy metal exposure. Have you been around lead, arsenic, cadmium, mercury, the toxicity of living in the modern society? And those are things that can be tested. So my blood panel for a 40-year-old coming to my clinic, or a 50-year-old or a 60-year-old, but I like starting early, is to assess all of these factors. And if somebody's got a particularly worrisome family, I hear this all the time from patients. I have a bad family history of heart disease. Well, that simply means to me I need to order more tests. What did you inherit? Did you inherit from your parents, your aunts, your uncles, your siblings? Lipoprotein a gene called 9p21. What's your ApoE status? And we can go beyond that now with nitric oxide synthase, SNPs, and the rest. Really, for a couple $100, you can get a very broad panel of cardiac genetics, including SNPs. So I will ask 100 questions. I will get 100 blood data points, and I will do it in a way that's actually pretty cost-friendly to patients. And then I'll have to decide if I'm going to do imaging. And if it's a 40-year-old, as I said, I'm probably going to image the carotid artery with ultrasound and save the radiation, particularly in a younger female. I really don't like to expose them to radiation until later in life. And if they're more in middle age, they're going to get the heart artery calcium CT. But bottom line, it takes a visit with all those questions, it takes some advanced blood work, and it takes an imaging study. So certainly, generally, way under $1,000, and sometimes way under $500. You're getting perhaps the most important information of your life. What's your arterial age? Are you going to be in the game to enjoy longevity? Or are you going to be on the sidelines and maybe 6 feet under the sidelines because you have no clue that you're a heart attack waiting to happen?
It's really interesting when we start thinking about chronic viruses. What are they? What's happening to the body? What impact do they have? And how do we feel when we have a chronic virus in us? Now, the truth is that we all have chronic viruses in us. We all do. There's a thing, I'm sure you've heard about the microbiome. And there's also something called the virome, which is where we have a virome community, a viral community in our body that can be influenced much like the microbiome depending on who its buddies are. That virome is also influenced by the microbiome. So truly how your body is can interact with your virome and mean whether your chronic viral infection is a problem or not a problem. This is one of the reasons why I think too many physicians underestimate the importance of testing for chronic viral infections, because they say, well, everybody comes up positive on some chronic viral tests. When somebody has a viral infection that's impacting their health, it has a very distinct feeling to it. Viruses love to live in nerves. So often people will have random nerve pain and sort of shocky feelings. This is a symptom that I hear a lot in my clinic, that somebody may have even ignored the symptom or felt too crazy to even share it with their practitioner. But truly, it's from that virus actually living inside those cells. Chronic viruses like to hide from the immune system. That's why they're still in there. And they have very particular ways to hide. They'll hide in tissues, they'll hide in nerves, like in that case of pain, or they'll hide in the mitochondria. One of the things they do is they go inside the mitochondria, which is where we create a lot of energy. It's our energy. It's where the ATP is created in our cells. And those chronic viruses literally go into the mitochondria and steal the frickin' sugar that your body's making for their own survival. And then they hide there, so the immune system can't even find them, which leaves people feeling exhausted in every single cell of their body because their energy is being drained in every single cell of their body. This is one of the reasons why when people have chronic fatigue, they can often feel really tired. And honestly, I think a lot of people who are wanting to live a longer, fuller life, it's really important for them to be able to figure out, are they hanging out with some chronic viruses that are sucking and draining their energy? If 30, 40, 50, 80% of your energy is being sucked away by something else, how do you have the energy to regenerate your cells, to think your brilliant thoughts, and to be your most energetic self? Whenever we're talking about chronic viruses, and somebody wants to know, like, what chronic viruses are inside of me, I always have to let them know, here's the truth. We may not know the name of all the viruses that are inside of you because we don't even have names for all the viruses. And those that we have names for, we only have a test for a few of those. And those that we have excellent tests for are 0. We have decent testing for one virus, and then we have just kind of not really great testing for all the other viruses. The testing we have the best virus for is Epstein-Barr virus. There's actually a panel that you can order to see if you have a history of having had that infection. And there's a way of reading the labs to interpret to see whether it's a reactivated infection. Then that happens to be one of the most common infections that we see. Now you have to ask, is it one because it's the most common infection, or it's the one that we have the best testing for? But it's one that I see a lot in the clinic and I treat for, and people feel so much better when we get that treated. One of the other common ones is cytomegalovirus, which is in the same family as Epstein-Barr virus. They're all part of the herpes family. The herpes family is a big viral family, and a number of those tend to love to live in the nerves. They tend to love to live in the cells and hang out, and they're very opportunistic. They tend to want to come back whenever somebody's under stress. Another very common one that's been linked with chronic fatigue syndrome is parvovirus, which is one that's more linked to gastrointestinal problems. And then, of course, there's SARS-2 COVID, which is definitely become a chronic infection, which is why we have long haulers. And where we're seeing almost a third of the world that has had COVID at some point or having the COVID infection now has long haulers.
So when we're trying to work up the underlying factors with dementia, there are a lot of lab tests that we do. It's really important that we pick up all of the factors that are out of balance or impacting the brain. If we fix some of them, but we don't fix all of them, you're not going to get well. We look at all of the hormones, and the hormones are so important for the brain because our brain has receptors for estrogen, testosterone, progesterone, pregnenolone, DHEA. Men and women both have all of those receptors in the brain. And there have been studies showing now that when people lose their hormones, their brains start atrophying. So we test all of those hormones, and then we can work to replace them as needed and put them back in balance. We test for toxins. So toxins are deadly for the brain. I think most people know mercury and lead are not good things to have for the brain, but there's other chemicals, and I mean, our world now, we've just become inundated with toxic chemicals everywhere. So we do a panel of testing for a bunch of different toxins, and we look at that. The other really important thing is infections. And I think from COVID, people are really getting the impact of what does a virus do to our brain, because we're seeing people that, you know, get COVID, recover, and then suddenly are getting demented, even younger people. So, you know, or they're reporting that they have long COVID and there's a lot of brain fog, right? We're all hearing that term. And so there's many infections that impact the brain. Besides herpes, we test cytomegalovirus, we test Epstein-Barr virus, which is Epstein-Barr recently made important news because they realized that 99% of cases of multiple sclerosis were linked to the Epstein-Barr virus. And again, that's a very common virus that most of us get in childhood. It can lead to chronic fatigue in people. And definitely what I've been seeing is after people get COVID, or even for some people after the COVID vaccinations, they are impacting the immune system. And normally the immune system, we have these viruses living in us. We don't really eradicate them. They stay quiet, and our immune system kind of keeps a lid on their activity. But when our immune system is busy with something else, like fighting the COVID or making the spike antibodies to the vaccine, it seems like it allows these viral titers to reactivate. And because I test these things in my patients, I know what they were, and then I can see them suddenly come back with quite a few viruses elevated. So I think that's such an important factor for us to test.
Wow, this part really was the answer to preventing the 1,000 small cuts. Tests for heavy metals, hormone levels, or even viruses can quickly determine the unique challenges you're facing that require immediate attention. If you're hungry for more insider knowledge, our next episode will be a true goldmine. But before signing off, I want to share how you too can prevent death by 1,000 cuts and reverse premature aging with the power of a few easy adjustments. If you've been feeling sluggish, tired, and have inexplicable aches and pains, you might be weighed down by inflammation. Fortunately, you're one step away from an easy and affordable way to start taming inflammation. What do I mean by that? You see, the solution to reversing premature aging is simple, but it's not always easy. You need to start caring for your body in the right way, with nourishing foods and drinks, with a good night's sleep, with moving your body and learning how to manage stress and feel happier. But a lot of people don't know where to start implementing the habits that would lower inflammation and transform their health. They get overwhelmed with all the confusing and contradictory information online. And sometimes they give up on their health. This is exactly why I created Zonia and why I'm so excited to be able to offer you the opportunity to give it a try. Inside Zonia, we give you over 1,000 health bites that provide you with the most important anti-inflammatory tools available. You'll learn how to cook simple, tasty foods using ingredients with ancient rejuvenation properties, or how to work out from home and get the exercise you need in just 10-15 minutes a day. You'll get the secrets of deep, restful sleep and a stress-free life with our guided meditation, hypnotherapy, and sleep stories, and other tools that are designed to keep your mindset free of negativity and stress. You'll get practical tips on how to protect yourself from environmental toxins and how to most efficiently activate your body's detoxification pathways. And best of all, you can get started at your own pace, set your own goals, and decide what content to use every day depending on your needs. You cannot transform your life overnight. but you can get started right away with just 5 minutes of self-care. Plus, when you join Zonia, you also get on-demand access to all 10 episodes of Ageless, the docuseries that will change the way you view aging, so you can watch any episode anytime you decide, and even rewatch it to take notes and refresh your memory. You also get new health bites with exciting new protocols and health tips every week, all tailored towards helping you get started on your goals. Zonia starts from as low as $10 a month, and you're covered by our 7-day money-back guarantee. So don't let inflammation hold you back any longer. Join Zonia now and start your journey towards optimal health and wellness. Now, the next episode is even more eye-opening. It covers everything you need to know about hormones and their complicated balance that so many people struggle with. You don't want to miss this if you're experiencing any weight, energy, sleep, or sex problems. That's it for now. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you soon.